So I'm John Francis Ranello, and I'll be talking about my grandparents and my great grandparents. So my grandfather came from Italy when he was 3, and he came with his brother and his sister and their mom, who was a widow, and she brought them. If you can imagine traveling overland with 3 kids to the nearest seaport, which at that time was Naples, Italy, and then traveling across the ocean in a boat. Um, and I think the crossing time back then was maybe 3 weeks or maybe more, a month. And then they landed in New York, and they went through customs there through at Ellis Island, and they went to from there they went on to Wisconsin, which was where we had family at the time. So she brought them there to Wisconsin, and she ended up marrying another man who was a farmer in the area, and he had 7 children, and they had 7 more children. So they had, what does that make, 17 kids on the farm. And that was when my grandfather was 3. Essentially is when they came over. So the reason they left, I think there were a number of reasons. Number one, she was widowed. Her husband died in a mining accident there in Italy, and it was a small town, and everybody knew each other. And I don't know. I think that, and this is all just from what I can glean from talking to people, because I never actually heard the story of why they left. So the other thing was, this was 1915. This was a year into World War One, and I'm thinking that it was too uncomfortable for them, for the women and children to live there. Probably for the men too, but they needed them for the army and stuff. So I'm thinking that's had something to do with their leaving as well. Also, everybody wanted to come to America, and since they had relatives here already, actually our family started coming over in the late 1800s, and they started. They started farming. They wound up in this particular area in Wisconsin and started farming there. And so all of the people in that area of Wisconsin are from the same area of Italy, as a matter of fact. So so they knew that there were people here. They knew they had a place to stay, certainly, and so I think that was another reason. I mean, if the opportunity afforded itself, why not go and start a new life where it was supposedly better. They did not. They did not speak English when they left. So, and I know my grandparents spoke Italian, but they never spoke Italian around us. When we were kids, we never really heard them speaking Italian other than to talk about the food. And of course it was all about the food. And the food was wonderful. So I know what things are, what they're called in Italian, but that's the only Italian I know. I don't know how to speak Italian otherwise. And for that matter, my dad doesn't know how to speak Italian either. So they never really spoke it to him either. So when they learned English, and being a 3 or 4-year-old, it came very quickly to them. And they were encouraged to speak English, and they were encouraged not to speak Italian. Now they had to speak it at home because that's what their parents spoke. Well, again, this goes back to the food. There was a lot of tradition around the food. Traditional foods that were made a certain way, and they were made by hand. As a matter of fact, so I learned to make ravioli, the family recipe ravioli, from my grandfather, who was 3 when he came here. And he learned how to cook because he didn't like working on the farm. So whenever it was time to go work in the fields, he would hide in the kitchen. And that's how he learned how to cook. So, so the recipe that I got from him was, for instance, to make the dough. You take a handful of flour, a pinch of salt, a half an eggshell of water, and an egg, and you make a well, and you mix them in from the edge until you get a ball and roll it up. And of course, now we have machines that we can mix it up with, and we have rollers that we can roll it out with. But they did all that by hand. Matter of fact, you wouldn't want to mess with my grandmother because she had really big arms. She was strong from rolling the dough. So most of the tradition was around the food, surrounded the food, and we used to have big family dinners, especially at the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and there would be everybody, the whole family was there. I mean, aunts, uncles, cousins, and all the kids were there. And the kids were usually at their own table, the kids' table, and the grown-ups were at the big table. And there'd be multiple courses of many different foods. You'd have the antipasti, which was salami and crackers and cheese and pickles and olives and things like that. And then you'd have the pasta, which would be ravioli or the gnocchi, and they would have all of these at the same time. So there'd be spaghetti and ravioli and gnocchi, and then after that was the meat course, and you'd have you'd have a turkey and a ham, and 4 or 5 different kinds of vegetables, and then you'd have desserts, multiple desserts, and coffee, and there'd always always be serving wine. A nice Chianti or something like that, was very traditional. So I remember those fondly. Actually, I was too young at the time to actually enjoy all the food. Number one, I didn't like it all. Number two, I couldn't eat that much. So I'm making up for it now, though.
Mm-hmm.